Good to see you all. Thank you for joining us here today for the final event of the HAIS Storyteller Series. In the past couple of weeks, we've held 3 workshops led by Khaty Xiong, Mai Neng Moua, and Burlee Vang. So tonight, the writers are coming together to read, and then the last half of this event will be reserved for a Q&A. We'd like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. The Fresno State campus is located in the heart of the central San Joaquin Valley, a valley rich in the traditions and representations of indigenous peoples and cultures. We are privileged to live and work in the traditional homelands of the Yokut and Mono peoples, whose tribal communities remain here and share stewardship over this land. We would also like to take this time to thank the Instructionally Related Activities Fund and the English Department for supporting the Storyteller Series. Special thanks to our advisor, Mai Der Vang, and to Jefferson Beavers and Lisa Galvez. Also thanks to my fellow HAI officers, Gao Yong Ning Vang, Lilly, and Lilly for all the planning and coordination that made these events possible. Before we introduce the speakers, we wanted to briefly mention how best to view this video call. We recommend speaker view so that you can see the speaker in a bigger view. And then we also have closed captioning if you would like to use them. You can turn on closed captioning by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking on show subtitle. During this event, we will be muting everyone during this event. If you would like to ask a question for the Q&A, you can drop it in the chat with the hashtag ask so that we can find it easier. And so now, before I introduce our first speaker, I want to pass the screen to Mai Der Vang, who will give a few remarks.
Thank you so much, Jer. It's an absolute honor to welcome you all this evening, and so wonderful to see you all on this Friday. I do want to just say a few remarks quickly in Hmong and then also something in English. Nhớ rằng ý chồng của tin cha Hmong của chia sẻ tên này sẽ được nó cả nhớ rằng tia mà nó bé mua ít có gì hậu rằng là thì làm lòng bé cho Hmong ấy cho xong đời thì cho sau lúc ba bé rằng xuyên này chỉ cũng đã bé mà nó bé sau này sẽ được trong nữa. It's incredible to think about how far we've come in this journey to create spaces for voices like ours to be heard. More than a decade ago, when I first got involved in the Hmong American Writers Circle, it was such a different time, running around asking people to donate to our literary cause, scraping by another late night workshop at Stone Soup, which I know Burlee will remember, or just trying to get the word out that Hmong writers do exist, right? We exist, we're here. We still have some of these challenges, of course, but we're much further along. And I don't think that I could have imagined then where we'd be now and where I'd be now, obviously too, fortunate enough to be in a position to support a new generation of writers. The 3 amazing and talented writers featured in tonight's reading have been instrumental in laying the foundation that has helped us to arrive where we are today. Thank you to the officers and members of the Hmong American Ink and Stories student organization who helped coordinate this series of events. And thank you all so much again for being with us this evening. So that's it from me. Back to you, Jer.
Thank you so much, Mai Der. And just I want to give a quick shout out to Mai Der, actually, that she has an upcoming second book called Yellow Rain, which will be published this September. So we're all really excited for more works contributing to our community. So we'll be dropping that in the chat. So you want to take a look, please do. And so thank you, Mai Der. Yeah, so we'll just get right on it. We have wonderful readers waiting for us. So our first speaker is a really critical literary figure in Hmong American literature, and it's thanks to her labor and work all these years that so many of us now have a sense of literary heritage. Mai Neng Moua is the founder of Paj Ntaub Voice, the Hmong literary arts journal, and the editor of Bamboo Among the Oaks, contemporary writings by Hmong Americans. Her memoir, The Bride Price, a Hmong Wedding Story, was published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press in March of 2017. Please help me welcome Mai Neng Moua.
Right. Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you to Hmong American Ink and Stories. Thank you to Mai Der. When I started Paj Ntaub Voice in 1994, I mean, some of you weren't even born then. this is the world that I imagined. You know, I was an emerging writer and I needed community. I wanted to know what other Hmong writers are writing, and I wanted to know what stories, you know, that they had within themselves. So I'm pleased to be part of this group. A big shout out to my writers and artists who will be reading tonight, Khaty Xiong and Burlee Vang as well. I'm so pleased to be reading with them, and this is the first time we'll be reading together. So I'm so thankful for this virtual space where we can read together and then have others, you know, listen in. So I'm going to be reading from my memoir, The Bride Price. This is the book. Ooh, I should hold it the other way so you guys can see it. But if you haven't read it, you know, it came out, it seems like so long ago, but this is my story. So I'm just going to start at the beginning. You know, when you write a 250-page book, it's always hard to know where to read, but this is towards the beginning of the book. So, do you think Nia will want a bride price when I get married? I asked my older brother, Kai. As he had always done since we were kids, he was up early watching Saturday morning cartoons. I stood to the side of the TV, making sure I was not blocking his view. It was a lame question since I knew the answer already, but I needed an opening. If I could not get through to Nia, maybe Kai could. Maybe if I had his support, the two of us could more easily persuade her to change her mind. Although I was younger, Kai consulted with me in making decisions that affected the family, buying Nia's vans, buying the Market Street house. We were good partners when it came to dealing with Nia. Since her father died when we were young, we took turns handling her. I think so, said Kai. Anyway, it's not up to you to decide. Why isn't it up to me? It's my wedding. That's not how it works, Mai. Usually it's the parents who decide whether or not to collect the bride price. What he meant was, I didn't get a say in this. Well, I don't want one. I don't want to feel like I'm bought and paid for. It's not like that, Mai, said Kai, turning off the TV. He called me Mai with a long eye, as if trying to placate me. You just don't understand what it is. That's why you say that. Later, I would learn from my elders that the bride price is known as Li Ming Li Nong, which translates as the price for milk and care. It is the debt owed to the parents for the milk and care used to raise a good daughter. It thanks them and says, we are marrying your daughter. It compensates the bride's family for their future economic loss because the bride would leave her family. Anything she makes from this point on would belong to her husband and his family. The elders say the bride price is a promise that the groom and his family will love and care for the bride and will not abandon or abuse her. Since they have invested good money in the bride, she is valuable and they will take good care of her. If the groom's family pays the requested bride price, it means they want the bride and their family. Although I didn't fully understand it, I said, I understand what it is. I just don't want it. Stop talking like that, Mai. It's not up to you. Nia will decide that. Can you talk to Nia and ask her not to collect the bride price? Kai looked at me as if to say, did you not hear anything I said? After all she's done for us, don't you think she deserves something, he asked. He meant after my father died in Laos in 1975, Nia took care of my two brothers and me on her own. He meant in 1976, a year after the Sikh War ended, we fled our mountain villages and hid in the jungles of Laos. On her back, Nia carried a bag of rice, a blanket, a parachute, and my little brother. With one hand, she held my hand. With the other, she carried live chickens so we would have food to eat. Kai carried a small pot of cooked rice and walked alongside her. In the jungle, men who had guns hunted monkeys, squirrels, and birds. Nia caught fish in the streams and looked for crabs among the rocks. She scrounged for palm hearts, potatoes, and other edibles. Nia worked hard so her 3 children, all under the age of 8, would not die of starvation or malnutrition as so many others did. After 2 years, we successfully made it across the Mekong River to the other side. The Mekong was the barrier between death or re-education camps in Laos and safety in refugee camps in Thailand. He meant during the 2 years in Ban Vinai refugee camp, Nia protected us from physical harm and disease, which killed a lot of people. He meant when we finally made it to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1981, Nia, who did not read, write, or speak English, navigated the social service system so that we had a roof over our heads, clothes on our backs, and food in our stomachs. He meant Nia brought us to St. Paul, Minnesota in 1987 to live with her uncles. She worked hard to make sure we stayed out of trouble. He meant although Nia was poorly educated, she made sure we went to school on time, did our homework, and graduated from high school or college. Yes, after all that Nia had done for me, she deserved the money and respect of other Hmong parents, parents who believed that by getting a bride price, they were good parents of good daughters, worthy of someone wanting them. Of course, Nia deserves something, I said. Look, you guys can do all the Hmong culture and rituals you want as long as you don't ask for a bride price. Did Blanc put you up to this? No, it had not occurred to me that Kai would think that Blanc had suggested it. Every Hmong man has to pay a bride price. Why shouldn't he? No, Blanc didn't put me up to this. It's me. I don't want the bride price. I could see that I was getting nowhere with Kai. I was getting angry and he was starting to speak faster. You're still Hmong, aren't you? Asked Kai. Of course I am. Then this is how Hmong people get married. I'm not saying I'm against Hmong marriages. I just don't want a price on my head. That's part of Hmong marriages. I know, but look, don't you want to make Nia happy? Of course I do, but what about what I want? You have to choose if it's more important to make yourself happy or to make Nia happy. I'll stop there. So that, I think, you know, for some of you that haven't read the book, I think sets up the struggle between me and my family on the bride price. In these next two pieces, I am going to read, hold on guys. Hey Sam, I'm doing a reading, please. That's my youngest daughter, I apologize. That's okay, thank you. I'm gonna be reading two pieces, two new pieces that I've been working on. And you know, I'm trying to write picture books because I've been thinking about books for our kids. And, you know, my kids are 11 and 13. I've been thinking about this for even before they were born, you know, because, you know, Hmong kids are important and they need to see themselves at the center as important characters who, you know, who are the protagonists at the center of the story. So these are new. I've been working on them. I don't really know how to write children's stories yet, but I think, you know, as Gandhi said, instead of waiting for the change, I think we should just be the change we want to see in the world. And so I'm trying it. And maybe I can use some of your help, you know, some feedback. So what I'm looking for is if the story, if the story is compelling, you know, and remember that these are children's stories, right? So adults will be reading these most likely to kids. Jefferson, if you can pull up one of the stories. Yes, so this first one is called Food for Thought, or maybe Hmong Chicken is home, or some other title. I don't really know what the title is yet, but I'm kind of playing with that. And, you know, what the industry says is that picture books should be about 500 words or less. So I'm conscious of the word count as well. So you see the word count up there. Okay, so this is Food for Thought. Once a week, the Yang family eats out. On this particular day, Dad asked Sam, the youngest child, "What would you like for dinner?" Sam's a fancy girl who drinks everything in a wine glass. She loves sushi the most. Salmon so buttery with its umami taste. Tuna sashimi so fresh it gives you a taste of the ocean. But sushi is expensive. Sam only asks for it on special occasions. Sam also loves a good steak, seared on the outside and pink on the inside, so soft you can cut it with a butter knife. With roasted mushrooms and rice, it is the perfect meal. But on this day, Sam says, I don't know. So Dad turns to Mama. What do you want for dinner? Mama's taste reminds him of tatay. Sometimes it is pig feet stewed until the meat falls off the bones. Cooked in chili sauce, it is so hot her nose runs, but she keeps eating it. It is so good, she says, in between blowing her nose. Mama also loves boiled pumpkins with a little bit of sugar. Boring, but so refreshing, she says. On weekends, Mama loves dim sum, little dishes you eat with your family. Chicken feet cooked until soft, tripe steamed with ginger, pork shortbreads and black bean sauce, pork and shrimp dumplings. So many choices. But on this day, Mama says, I don't know. Dad turns to Erica, the oldest. She's not a picky child. She could go for tacos. On Tuesdays, the Mexican restaurant down the street has tacos for $1. Corn tacos with heaps of beef and onions topped with lime. Or in Hmong village, there are deli stalls with roast pork with crackling skin, Hmong sausage with ginger, stuffed chicken wings, purple sticky rice. So many choices. But on this day, Erica says, I don't know. Well, what are we going to have for dinner? Asked Dad. He is a fan of pho, Vietnamese noodle soup, the broth of beef bones cooked overnight so the taste is full and rich. The smell of sweet basil, fresh lime, and sriracha, followed by drinking the hot broth down to the very last drop. But on this day, even he didn't know what he wanted for dinner. Why don't I make Hmong chicken? Suggests Mama. She boils the chicken with lemongrass and chicken herbs. When the chicken is cooked, she takes it out, rips it apart. She adds salt and black pepper. She gives her children each a drumstick. She puts the broth in small bowls with rice on the side. It is simple but healthy and hearty. This is delicious, says Sam, sipping the warm broth. This is my favorite, says Erica, taking a bite of the drumstick. Mama and Dad smile, for it didn't matter how rich or poor, how young or old or where. This meal of chicken broth and rice is home. So the rest is just some back matter, is what they call it. It's a recipe for, Hmong chicken soup, I guess. So that's one of the picture books I'm working on. I really wanted something that, talks about, this simple dish that we all Hmong people know and feels like home to us, amongst all the beautiful food that we have access to, for my family. That soup of like Khaty Xiong is always home. So, okay, this next piece, Jefferson, is called Mai Tatay. And the word tatay is the Hmong word for maternal grandmother. So this is Mai Tatay. And all right, I'll just read it. Mai Tatay does not say, I'm worried about you. She calls my mom and says, I had a bad dream last night. Don't go anywhere. Or she says, there's a lot of snow today. Be careful driving. Mai Tatay does not say, I miss you. She comes over to my house. She shows me how to plant, weed, and harvest a garden of D and thal in the backyard because she knows I love the taste of cool D in the summer and thal in the winter. Tatay also grows cilantro, green onions, and hot peppers, all staples of Hmong life. Mai Tatay does not say, are you all right? When I fall down and skin my knees, she picks me up. She says, you're only going to grow. She puts a Band-Aid on my knees and says, you're all better now. She wipes away my tears and says, don't cry. My tatay does not say good job or well done or congratulations. She gives me money for my birthdays. For Christmas, she gives me socks and underwears because who can't use clean socks and underwears? She sells my Hmong outfits for me so I can be the best looking girl at the Hmong New Year. My tatay does not say, do you have enough? When we go on road trips, she packs chicken and rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for all of us. She gives my mom money. When my mom refuses, tatay says, take it. Who else is going to give you money but your mom? My tatay does not say, I'm sorry. She buys me stuff, a dress, a watch, or cooks a meal that I like. And when tatay is lost for words, she just never, ever brings up the topic ever again. My tatay does not say, I love you. When I visit, she asks, have you eaten? If she's eating, she insists I eat with her. She fills my plate with the best pieces of meat. She tells me, eat more so you can grow big and strong. And before I go home, she gives me 2 bags of candy. When I refuse, she says, take them. No one here is going to eat them. And yet she always has candy at her house. Even though my tatay does not say, I'm worried about you, or I miss you, or are you all right, or good job, or well done, or congratulations, or do you have enough, or I'm sorry, or I love you, I know she loves me. I love my tatay too. So that's the last of it. Yeah, I wanted to write a story about, how much our parents love us and how they never say these like seemingly American things like I love you or I'm sorry, but their love is through their actions and what they do for us. So that's the end of my reading, and I'm going to pass it on to Jer, and we're going to hear from lovely Khaty Xiong and also fabulous Burlee Vang.
Thank you, Mai Neng. That was really wonderful. And I can't wait for the day where I see those 2 stories out in the world. Yeah, this next speaker, I had the privilege of interviewing her earlier this year for the normal school, and her words gave me so much to ruminate on. I believe she'll do the same for you all. Khaty Xiong is a poet from right here in Fresno, California. She's the author of Poor Anima, which holds the distinction of being the first full-length collection of poetry published by a Hmong American woman in the United States. Her recent honors include a 2020 Ruth, Lilly, and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship and a Vermont Studio Center Fellowship from the Ohio Arts Council. And you can read more at her website, khatyxiong.com. So please help me welcome Khaty Xiong.
Thanks so much, Jer and Mai Neng. Your stories, thank you so much for your words. It's, I actually haven't stopped thinking about our time in Tampa. That feels so long ago now. And yeah, so tonight really is really unique and special in that it's the first time I'm also reading with Burlee. And my days from Fresno to now, it's been a really long journey, and I'll be reading some pieces that are quite heavy, and that, the work I've been doing over the last few years have been grief work. They are related to the losses in my family and my relationship to death, inside death and outside of it, as I live and as I move on without my mom and my late brother and my late uncle as well. I actually began writing my grief poems probably earlier before my brother's passing, but I think the conversation really took hold of me in 2014 when my brother had passed, and I began writing all these grief letters to my brother. And then my mother passed shortly after as well. And I've been focusing on my mom's death I'll be reading one poem from my first book, Poor Anima, and then I'll be reading 3 other poems, newer poems. One is already published, but it's something that I feel like so the new poem I will read later is a poem that I wrote the last time I saw my family in Fresno in 2019. So right before quarantine, I was, in Fresno during the summer, July 2019, and I got to be with my dad. I visited him on his farm, and I still think about that actually. And so that's a poem I'll revisit, and then I'll be reading 2 brand new poems, unpublished. So we'll see how that goes. This first one is called Bad Blood, and it is from Poor Anima. It's a poem I don't think I've read before, in the before times where poetry readings in person was a thing. But it's been a while since I've looked at this book for a lot of reasons. But here it is, Bad Blood. The dead return, black, reincarnate. They have paid the entry fee. They come to tell me my clothes are unfitting. I have been predictably unlucky. American raised, tastes and all. It is said the mouth guides the ear, the same ear that guides the body. Exile opens such possibility, and ghosts remind you to care. Somewhere someone remembers for me the 2 ways to remember stories. The mother tongue, a myth, guided and guarded for reasons to keep on. I mean language touched by letters, the ones that teach surrender. The pardoning hour. Here at my parents' farm, trumpeting bees scoring in the ears of all flower kind. Chilies and kabocha, 3,400 searing steaks of Indian bitter melon. Gao Nung in her hot prison bearing witness. My father emerges from the field, his arms in blooming greens and yellows, a mutable image I never thought possible. My life running in every direction, devoted and never into death. My father calls me over. There by the roadside farm stand, a young coyote repentantly crossing into the golden hills of no return. Spilled brain and other wounds bubbling under the aegis of Ganong. Buma, my father tells me, the losing cousin of a tiger once revered in the former country. At home, such tales are revealed to me. But there is no story for the desperate cry of a killdeer locked in a small sandstorm, uninvited and combing away at the foot of my father's lesser garden. No hidden meaning when it finally breaks at the towering row of his Chinese waxy corn, where I await my mother's song returning from beyond the Sierra Nevada and into the fettered throats of his guarding cowbirds, whistling in an alarming rise to keep away the flies. In verse, we scald ourselves. Dream the good dream, pollutal in the folded tongue. 2 half shadows thinking tutalia. The gift of a curved bone carving our way back to Ja Pana, dear Ja Vinai. Back even further, the Denakong, where the Cho, lined with cadavers, smells sweet of rice and wild yams, where the buzzards and shadows of B-52s are not allowed to land. I steady myself, though I am not my own talisman, gelid current to napalm eyes. In the sweltering interim, my stepmother pulling her body out of the rusted wheelbarrow, wearing the skin of a great-grandmother, one leg over the rim, the other steeped in noonday ash. My mother's ballad wicking at her brow, tumbling into the nearby bed prepared just for this moment, bushels of melon leaves picked for the monthly shipment to China. Kundiman, lost again, traversing again into the earth, into a most fluid exile. My stepmother weeping into the mirage of the hissing coyote. Here at the farm where we are absent from dying, I give up and re-enter the valley. What more can I see? She braving the mountains, the dust stirring above my feet, my fist a glowing peach. This next poem is a newer one. And I spend a lot of my time actually in Ohio, in the outdoors, and thinking my way through grief. And this poem is one of those places where I am intersecting with death at all times and thinking about my mother and the afterlife and how she's doing. This is called Among the Goldenrods. In array, the omen, hedged with cardinal flowers, the wild garden consulting with a hair trap, the field stretched and buried, with deer droppings, some remorse laid by limbs long gone, penumbral, felled arms of goldenrods gathering in this wake. The lineal dream, broken galls, parochial, ring-necked pheasants sinking in the open country. Oaks with sunlight slipping tongue for tongue, a clearing marked in the crop of a chickadee. I pass, keep passing. Some cause learned enough to send for the sun immobile from the edge of winter. Love seething in grounds before me, the wind in a bough above the black crown cutting back to kiss me. The long death making pact with palms of flowers, mother's dead eye once more frothing with nectar. My hair birthing into serpents. This very spring returning to me, the idyllic ruin so watery, I must forgive the shores gathering at my feet. The beginnings of earth raised in hills of fire. The perennial hour of hurried geese, sliding storms to cry home. O wanton mother, blade at the heel, come forth. At the mark of the hedgerow I cut, make game of my neck, make scar of the cardinal flower, the sky mute upon the tides. 5 suns budding inside my form. Such illumination, moons unwilling, mother's fingers mangled in metal emerging from the stars. And this last poem I will close with is called Apart from the Hour, Spring Again. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight, and to my readers, to Jefferson and Jer and Mai Der, and to everyone who have come across my way and in my life. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I actually, just real quickly, hearing Mai Der speak in Hmong in the very beginning of our reading tonight, it's almost as if I've forgotten what it sounds like. I really miss being in community with my Hmong family. I'll stop there because I'll start crying. But, oh, okay. Apart from the hour, spring again. For a while, I was running along the current of my mother's body. Our songs in circuit, the path in both brains dissolving before crocus and emerald ash. Then the tears becoming amber, including the pulp that slipped out of our mouths and into the doors of the earth. Little tadpole born to the wrong body of water. Her face in the wrong colors, even the voice has finally begun to rot. Yet I am lured by the shapes of spring bowing in the shadows of noon. The honey locust still dormant from winter's purge. The striking currency of the Japanese maple blushing inside and out. Such ills and other temperaments to prove the world its rules too demanding. There goes mother's skin weaving into the streets, so bloated the arteries burst into petals. What else rearranges itself late of day? Raccoon deep in the damp grass, dog baying seedlings, mother's hair threading across the branches, eggs and thick laurels of spider webs. My eye scaling the length of a worm beating the beak of a robin. I have arrived. I am unbearable. Thanks, everyone.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Khaty. Just breathtaking. Hearing you read is always such a moving experience. Thank you. Thank you. For our final speaker, the first time I met him was a few years ago during a reading, and he was very kind and friendly, very welcoming to a new writer like me. During my time in the MFA program here, actually, I was thrilled that I was able to get my hands on his thesis, a collection of stories, and read it. And Burlee is just multi-talented. Burlee Vang is the author of The Dead I Know, Incantation for Rebirth, and co-editor of How Do I Begin, a Hmong American literary anthology. His prose and poetry have also appeared in Plowshares, Alaska Quarterly Review, and North American Review, among others. Also a filmmaker, he was awarded the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences 2011 Nicole Award for the screenplay The Tiger's Child. With his brother, he co-directed Bedeviled and the upcoming supernatural drama They Live in the Gray. Burlee also founded the Hmong American Writers Circle, a creative space for Hmong writers to workshop and share writing resources. Please help me welcome Burlee Vang.
Hi, everyone. I want to first thank all the officers of HAIS for putting this event together. It's a privilege to be reading with writers like Mai Neng and Khaty. I'm very excited to be here tonight. I also want to thank Jefferson Beavers and Mai Der. Tonight, I will be reading an excerpt from a short story. It's unpublished. It's from my working collection, and it's titled Two Sisters. Yua knelt all morning in the attic, her hands pressed over the cross necklace she had locked away for 2 years, her Bible spread open to the Sermon on the Mount. Although there was tenderness in her knees from a fall some time ago, it did not break her concentration. She told the Lord that she was ready to forgive, and in her concession, the warmth of his grace folded over her bowed head. When they first moved in, the attic was used for storage, but now it served as a prayer room for Yua. A circular window with a cross frame let the sun through the east wall. Beneath it sat one of her children's old twin bed and a forest green dresser where she kept her Bible. A dollar store painting taken from her mother's bedroom after the funeral of Jesus holding a lamb and surrounded by kids in modern career outfits hung from a nail. The air smelled of wood and rust, which Paul had blamed on the pipes. 2 years ago, he had decided that the light in the attic would be good for her sewing, but she'd given up embroidery by then, and because the light there was good, had only used the room for prayer and reading. It was here after the injury that Yua had committed her nights and weekends to reading all 66 books of her NIV Bible, 3 times in 2 years. She'd been careful not to damage the cranberry leather, flipping the delicate spread of paper and adding scribbles to her post-it notes each time a new revelation of a familiar verse came to her. And she prided herself in her ability to memorize long passages from the Gospels, Matthew being her favorite. On occasion, her mind would summon a verse from the book. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. The words stilled Yua's heart as she ended her prayer. Recently, she'd been noticing the signs. When she opened her eyes, the sun was beaming through the brown window, forming a perfect circle of light around the rug where she knelt. How ungrateful it would be to regard this as coincidental. She stood up, kissed her cross, and tucked it under her blouse. The necklace had been purchased as part of a bargain set from a Vietnamese jeweler and given to her when their mother was still alive. It will never lose its shine, not like American gold, her sister Ina had boasted, handing Yua hers and slipping the other around their mother's neck while the old woman lay on her deathbed. The gold was bright yellow and soft to the touch, easy to bend because of its high caratage. When Yua used to babysit for the church nursery, a toddler she cradled in her arms had taken hold of the necklace and quietly chewed the legs of Jesus, denting his shins forever. Yua came down from the attic and passed through the upstairs walkway, avoiding areas in the old hardwood floor she knew would creak. Although it was early fall, the house held the silence of winter. Her teenage children would sleep until noon since it was the weekend. When they were young, Saturdays were spent fishing at Lost Lake or barbecuing at Woodward Park. If it rained, they would visit Ina and her husband, and the sisters would sew and compare their cross-stitchings over talk about how their mother loved their brother most, or they would cook up a batch of nava for the kids to enjoy. For a time, they'd been close. On Sundays, Yua and her family would shuffle into their Toyota Previa, all 8 of them, dressed in the best they could afford, and race down Old Belmont Road, hoping to avoid stares from the pews for being late again to morning service. But now the children preferred idling in their bedrooms all weekend with their loud music and video games. No one, including Paul and Yua, had attended church in the last 2 years. They had not heard from Ina since. Downstairs, Yua found Paul leaning next to the microwave as it hummed. He'd poured himself the ginseng tea she'd made before going up into the attic. There was satisfaction in the way he sipped his cup, and his shirt was soaked as if he'd climbed a mountain. I found where the leak is, he said. For a week, water from the upstairs bathroom had soaked through the ceiling of the living room. Is it bad? She asked. I should be able to fix it. The microwave beeped, and Paul pulled out a bowl of leftovers. He started setting the counter for 2. I'm fasting again, she said. He looked at her without surprise and put away the extra plate. All these years, he was still a very plain man, Yua thought. His lips naturally flattened into an uneasy smile. The mop of hair swept to the left without a comb's effort above an unremarkable face. Unless he had to be at work in a simple polo and black slacks, it was always a faded colored tee, tucked into a pair of old jeans, all of it as ordinary as the white strings that knotted over the gray tennis shoes. A pair of glasses when he turned 40, and a new name after he gave up fixing people's sinks and toilets to become an insurance agent had done little for him. As he ate, he began naming the different tools and parts he would need to buy from the hardware store in order to do the repair. Yua wondered if he missed being a plumber. Sometimes you had to become a new person, he'd said the day he changed his name. He'd been a plumber up into the first years of their marriage, driving around in a clunky blue van, but the van was gone and he sold insurance policies with his younger brother at a modest office on the east side of Fresno. 8 months after the firm opened, the brothers had reached all their friends and relatives they knew, so a new name would help with expanding their clientele beyond the community. It's the right thing to do, he reasoned then. The right thing to do. What was left in her heart after all this time was the right thing to do. I'm going to visit my mother, Yua said. Paul paused over his food. I should go with you. She shook her head, and he did not insist anymore. Whether a matter of decision was significant or trivial, he had allowed her to quietly rule without compromise. She hadn't asked for it, but her older sister had wronged her greatly, and this unspoken treaty in their marriage was a simple way of understanding the pain and enmity she harbored. She knew it was all a man like Paul could offer, and as a consequence, she turned into the imperious wife she dreaded becoming. I am going to forgive her, she said reservedly. His brow tightened, as if he were trying to think of something meaningful to say, but all that came out was a simple, well, I guess that's what you've decided then. At Mountain View Cemetery, Yua tried to bring herself to call her sister. She typed into her phone's keypad Ina's number, which she erased from her contact list as if the act would blot it from memory. She stayed in the car for a long while, unable to press the dial, before she walked out into the lawn of gravestones. 5 years had passed since the old woman left her 2 daughters and the spoiled son who had run off to Minnesota when she fell ill. The year before she died, Yua felt the well of embitterment in her fill up to its rim but she did not let it spill, even as she washed and fed the old woman. Ina had abandoned the chore of caring for the dying mother, saying it was the responsibility of their unreliable brother. 3 months after the funeral, Yua stood at the gravesite and wept. Why didn't you have more children? It was more a statement than a question. The day had been gloomy with an unbearable silence. There was no breeze, no ghostly whisper, no bird or insect flitting nearby to give her a sign from the other side. It was foolish to reserve blame for the dead. Since that afternoon, she'd promised herself never to visit the old woman with anger in her heart. As she approached the grave now, the day felt uninspired by grief and indignation. The grass still wet with the morning's dew, a few crows cawing in the trees above the thrum of a leaf blower, and voices of workers shouting from the orange grove behind the cemetery. The headstone was enormous, even for the unsmiling woman in the photograph at the center of it, and it sat among the names of uncles and aunts whose families Yua had no longer spoke to. She and her brother had each paid a quarter of the total for the marble slab, while Ina covered the rest of the amount, including the cost of the overwrought inscription and accessories. Now the stone angel and the double vases without flowers seemed extravagant, especially for someone who had lived her whole life in America as a widow with 3 children. But this had been the very reason why Ina was willing to pay for it. She is still our mother. We need to save our own faces in front of the relatives, Ina said when their brother argued that everything was too much. Yua looked at her phone now and thought of calling Ina again. Instead, she bent down and pulled out a sprout of weeds at the base of the monument. Then after what felt like the right moment to depart, she walked back to her car. She was not going to call. It did not feel right to say what she wanted to say over the phone. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. As she drove out of the cemetery, she pulled off to the roadside of the orange grove. In the rearview mirror, a pair of eyes, wrinkled from the anxieties of middle age, stared tiredly back at her. The beauty was still there. She'd been the more beautiful daughter, as her mother bluntly put it to Ina. But it was masked under the extra weight and wrinkles brought on by childbearing and the years of rearing 6 of them. She sighed, feeling the fatigue that comes with fasting, which seemed to heighten the tenderness in her knees. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. She pressed her head on the steering wheel and closed her eyes. Oh Lord, she whispered, I come to you again for guidance. Give me the strength to face my sister. As she prayed, she saw herself, her 6-year-old self, standing by a slow river in Laos, unable to swim and crying at Ina, who had jumped in with the other children, who splashed with joy and only paused to stick her tongue out at Yua. She saw the 2 of them again, a little older now, and their mother carefully comparing the embroidered belts she had them sew for the New Year outfits, then nodding in approval at Ina's lattice work. In another memory, a young man smiled at only one of them. Once during a potluck gathering, the church choir showed more favor toward one sister's dish. She also saw Ina alone, sitting by a casket, widowed at 46. Yua saw herself alone too, with no sister to share the burden of a dying mother. A hard knock on the driver's side startled Yua. When she opened her eyes, a policeman was standing outside her car, motioning her to roll down the window. You all right? Yes. Did you faint? No. You can pass out of this heat with the windows rolled up like that. Look, you can't park here. I'm going to wait for you to go. The cop walked back to his car. Yua couldn't remember having ended her prayer. Had she fallen asleep on her thoughts? It happened sometimes when she buried herself in deep meditation. But here, out in the middle of nowhere while praying, she couldn't help but feel a bit foolish. She pulled back onto the road and watched the police cruiser disappear in her rearview mirror. Why did he think that she had fainted? How long had he stood there watching her? Yua had only fainted once in her life. Until that day, she'd imagined it as a feeling of immediate heaviness, the body dropping like a sack of heavy objects. It was after telling Ina on the phone that she'd never forgive her that Yua found herself in the driveway, staring up at the old sycamore in her lawn, just staring, until she felt the weightlessness, the sudden absence of gravity, like something precious leaving the vessel, her body spreading into a feather, her sight darkening over the tree. There was no heaviness to it. She awoke in a hospital room with an IV in her arm. A detached voice in a white coat explained that she had passed out from dehydration and the lack of food. You must have fallen pretty hard, the voice said. You fractured your knees. But all she could do then was stare at the wafting dust particles caught in a film of sunlight breaking from the outside world into her room through a missing window blind. As Yua drove back into town, it dawned on her, as calm and unpredictable as all things that come from the Lord, how she would settle the matter with Ina. She mumbled a quick prayer as she sped north on Palm. She'd almost missed the turn a few lights after she passed Fig Garden Village. Living Brick Supplies, now blocked from the street view by Starbucks, was still the small family business Eula recalled. It had been 15 years since she walked in with Paul and purchased a wooden cross for her home. In this corner plaza, lodged between a pet shop and what used to be a laundromat, the store had survived through the arrival of the Berrien Christian Stores chain near River Park, which Ina had introduced her to when the church committee had been asked to buy paintings and wall decor with Bible verses for all the Sunday school classrooms. But Berrien was closed forever across the nation, and it was nice to return to an atmosphere of familiarity. She walked through the 5 aisles of books and pendants and statues of cherubs as she would an antique shop until she came upon the section of leather Bibles. She examined the price and quality of each, selling on one with a dark brown cover, the size of her own Bible. It was a new international version and had 2 white ribbon markers, just like hers. The young clerk asked if she wanted it to be engraved, and when he said he could do it right away for an additional $10, she agreed to it. He went into the back room, and when he was done with the engraving, he rang her up and she paid the total. As she tucked the receipt into her purse, a familiar voice startled her, and she spun around nervously. And I think I'm going to stop there. Again, you guys, I want to thank you guys for this opportunity. This excerpt is from a story that I finished. It's like 16 pages long, so I'm only reading this much, but it is from a collection that I'm working on. Hopefully I get it out there one day. And yeah, so I'm going to turn it back to Jer.
Thank you, Burlee. That was great. And just knowing that it's a part of a collection, we're gonna pray that it's gonna get out there so that we can finally know how it ends. Thank you. Can we take a moment to give our readers a round of applause, just like visually or through the emojis or their reactions? Let's please give them a round of applause. Thank you to the readers. Yeah, and so we're gonna just go ahead and just transition into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat with the hashtag ask. And then while those like new questions are coming in, we did also have some other questions ready for the readers. Some are addressed to all of you, some are addressed for specific people, but then we can keep this fairly free flowing, and so the speakers feel free to just like add on top of each other. So the first question, it was addressed to all of you, is what are your thoughts on reconciling the traditional oral Hmong storytelling with Western writing storytelling? When we write stories, are we excluding our elders from participating? When we write stories, is something lost in the act of writing versus speaking? The poet Sol Vang wrote in his poem, The Shaman Poet, quote, "How sad for the modern Hmong poet who has no shaman calling, and for the old Hmong shaman who can't master the new language. The poet, a successor who can't inherit, the shaman, a master vow apprentice," unquote. So this person was interested in y'all's thoughts about that. So I'll also drop in the chat, but yeah, what are your thoughts on reconciling the traditional arts, the traditional storytelling versus Western? When we write stories, are we excluding our elders from participating? And when we write stories, is something lost in the act of writing versus speaking? And so any of y'all feel free to just jump in.
So my thought is that, the way shamans are called to be shamans is that it's calling, and they're chosen by the spirits. In that same way, I feel that as writers and as artists, we are also called. And so the stories that we write, we use the language that we feel most comfortable, in expressing ourselves. So I write in English, though Hmong is my first language. They're different stories than what the stories that my mom would tell. And because we can read and write in whatever language we want, then we get to be, we get to tell our stories. And I think the piece for me that's missing are the stories of our elders, because they can't read and write in English or in Hmong or any language. Their stories need to be captured, because honestly, we don't really know our parents' stories. we know the big, big common story of, the secret war, and then we leave Laos and we come to refugee camps in Thailand, and then we come here, but we don't know the real details. Like, we have to ask our parents for those details, and if you're in a place where you're ready to listen, then our parents are ready to tell those stories. And I think we need to capture those stories before our elders all die out. It's been 40 years that Hmong people have been in America, and many of our elders have already passed. And so with that passing is the loss of information. So I'll stop there.
I would just say and add to that, for me, I'm thinking of when the part of the question, when we write stories, is something lost in the act of writing versus speaking? Arguably, yes to both. How is something not lost when it's written as opposed to being said? But also going back to, are we excluding our elders from participating? To an effect, sure. Although I will also say that it had not been for lack of trying. When I was younger, my mother's tried to teach me how to sing kutia, but it just didn't happen. And so I turned to writing because it seemed like, I don't know, a lack of frustration and being unable to participate in the traditions that my mother's and my family had wanted of their daughters or nieces. And so, yeah, I don't know, when I'm writing, I definitely feel like there's always something lost when I'm writing. I'm never able to transcribe everything that I want to express on the page. And often it's the page that kind of ends up letting me figure out what it was I was trying to say. And then in speaking to my parents, or when I get the chance to speak to them, the questions, the details that Mai Neng is talking about, the details that are left out that we don't know about, the larger narrative that we are all familiar with how the Hmong people arrived. I would say, yeah, those details being lost, artifacts, are kind of what happens when we write. I don't think that we lose a bit of ourselves when we write and create, but I do feel like something is not being amplified.
Okay, I don't know if I could be as articulate as Khaty and Mai Neng on this, but in regards to our elders being excluded, I think that is inevitable, and I think it works vice versa too, with us and our elders. But I think that kind of loss is okay. I guess I wouldn't grieve over that kind of loss, but I accept it as part of, that things are changing, constantly evolving. And so it's part of the natural order for things to constantly become something else. So if we look at it from a macro perspective, then the Hmong spirit or the human spirit is just constantly changing. And so storytelling is going to constantly change from generation to generation, from medium to medium. So for me, I'm okay with it, but I don't expect everyone to think the same, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. For this next question comes from Mai Zhong, and it's actually, sorry, it's also another three-part question. But it's focused on kind of poetry. So this is for Khaty, but Burlee and Mai Neng, feel free to jump in and answer too. What is your process in storytelling in your poems? How do you approach the process? And then how do you weave stories into your poem? How do you approach beginning a story and wrapping it up in your poem? So essentially, yeah, the process, the storytelling, how does that work for you all?
I'll go ahead and start. My process always seems to change. So I really don't know what has worked for me. And maybe that's my process. I just kind of go with whatever is kind of happening. It's funny because in real life, like I am I'm fairly organized, but my writing process, though, it comes at such, I don't know, various angles, time of day, maybe even the season, really kind of impacts how I move and think and write. Actually, you know, the newer pieces that I read tonight, they're both spring pieces, and I have found myself over the last 5 years of my mom's death that I tend to write or emerge in spring. I spend pretty much all of like summer, you know, fall and winter ruminating, just thinking and crying a lot, and kind of not a whole lot happens. When people ask, like, what do you do when you write a poem, or how does it look like? 90% of my process is not writing. It's literally living my life, doing what I need to do. And then the 10% is the actual writing part. And so for other creatives, they have set schedules or time of day, they must write, they must complete. But I've always just kind of weaved in and out, you know, in my mind, in my day. And so, yeah, it's not the most exciting answer, but it's like, in short, I don't know. I just kind of write whenever I feel like writing. That's the short answer.
I think for me, when I think, Kathy, you're right in that, even when we're not physically writing, we're thinking about it in our heads, and we're connecting stories, and we're ruminating about it, as you said. But what I find is that when I do write, that the more I write, the more it comes, and I think it goes back to that idea of shamans are called to be shamans, and as writers, we are also called to be writers and artists. That's why those stories are in our heads. That's why they keep coming, that the more you write, the more will come. And so, my stories start, both the picture books, it started with an idea of what I wanted to do, and for me, sometimes, because I've been thinking about it for a long time, that it comes out, and it's more of like, what words do I want to use, so that the story comes out in the way that I want. What our friend Ball told me was that, not only do you have to write the story, but you have to make it sing. Of course, the poet would say that, right? You have to make it sing. And so, sometimes it's really about the sound of it. How does it sound, especially for poetry and even for picture books. But sometimes, and I don't really know sometimes how the stories will all fit, but I get an idea and I write it down, and I get another idea and I write it down. And don't get rid of the ideas, because they're going to come back, or they might solve a problem that you have later on. So
So storytelling for me, because I work in different genres, then it gets a little tricky. If I find that a story is driven by imagery or feelings, if it has more ethereal quality, then I tend to just sort of like let it be more loose, and therefore for me it belongs in a poem. But if a story comes to me and it has an arc with characters, then I separate that from poetry. I say, this is going to be I not figure out, is this going to be a short story, or if it's going to have to be told in a novel format. The novel format frightens me, because I guess you could say because I do a lot of poetry, short story writing is like the closest thing to poetry writing. But that's how I approach, I guess, storytelling. If it's characters, then that's between a short story or maybe a screenplay. Yeah, it's weird. It's just when the ideas come to me, I just have to determine whether or not, or which genre I'm going to be using as the medium for that story, and it's different from idea to idea.
That's actually a great segue, Burlee, to the next question. This person asked you specifically, Burlee, about what are your thoughts on genre? And Mai Neng and Khaty, feel free to answer that too. But how does writing across genres, from poetry to fiction to nonfiction to screenwriting, how does that inform your overall storytelling, Burlee?
So how does that inform overall storytelling? I mean, just going from what I said earlier, to me, if I feel that something needs to be told, but it isn't really concrete, then that's where I think that the poem is the best, medium for it. And like what Khaty said, you don't have a time set for it. It sort of comes to you in images or lines, and you sort of see the line breaks, and they just come, and they might take days, or they might come right away. They might come right when you wake up from sleep, and you sort of jot it down. You let it become its own thing. Like for poems, I find that you can't control poetry, and that's sort of nice. Now with the short story, it's very calculated. So if I and usually this is where I, if I run into somebody and hey, that's a character, I need to tell that person's story, or I need to like take that person's persona and build a story arc around the character, then I'm going to be very calculated, and there will be no poem about that person. But let's say if I find a person and that person is, I don't know, in that moment, I don't need to tell the person's story, but I need to capture what that person is feeling. Then that might become a poem. In terms of screenplays, then I have to ask myself, who's going to finance this? Who's going to watch it? Because unlike fiction and poetry and nonfiction, is that the writing part for films is just the blueprint. You have to actually make the movie. You require an entire team. You require the financing, and so now I would say with screenwriting, it's 80% business, and then the rest is like, is this, is someone going to finance this piece of art? And if not, then you have to go back to the drawing board again. So the way for me, I find myself thinking about ideas in different ways. Like if I know that this can sell, then it's a screenplay. If I want to write for myself, then it's the other three genres. If that makes any sense. And if I can find a balance between the two for screenwriting, then that's sort of where the magic happens. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Burlee. And so I don't know if Mai Neng, Khaty, if you all want to contribute on the question about what are your thoughts on genres or writing across genres. If not, I can move on to the next question. Okay. Oh yeah, Mai Neng, go ahead.
Just that, I write creative nonfiction because I feel like there's so many Hmong stories that still need to be told, and I feel like I have to get those out first. Kind of like my memoir, my God, the memoir was so long. It took forever, but it had to be written. And now that that's done, I feel like, ooh, now I can write fiction, and I can play with other things. And there are so many forms out there when it comes to like children's stories. There's not just picture books. There's like middle grade and young adult and graphic novels. Graphic novels are great. I discovered them because my kids are reading them. I'm like, wow, this is so fabulous. It's a form that is really, really accessible to kids. Especially the kids who don't like to read. They're like, no, I hate reading because I don't read for fun. Well, I have one of those kids, and she loves graphic novels. So I'm figuring that there are lots of different mediums to tell our stories. But what we need to do is we need to actually sit our asses in a chair and actually write those stories in whatever medium you want. So that's the hard part.
Thank you, Mai Neng. And yes, that's definitely the hardest part. Mai Neng, this is actually a question directed toward you. This person said, you have done great work in pioneering communities of Hmong artists and putting together projects such as Paj Ntaub Voice and Bamboo Among the Oaks. How important is the idea of community for underrepresented writers? And can we do more work to create or join communities? Or can a writer survive as a solo artist?
I tell you, writing is such a lonely act, right? Because you're all by yourself and the only voice you hear is your own in your head. And I find that to be really lonely. And yes, I like that process of creating by myself, but I need community. I want to be in the community. I mean, that's why I started like Paj Ntaub Voice, and you've got Bamboo Among the Oaks. And because I think as an emerging writer, you need support and you need inspiration from others. And I needed that as an emerging writer. I'm still an emerging writer in some ways, but to know that there are others out there that are creating, and if they're being published, that's like inspiration. I mean, you might be like, damn it, Mai Der has a second book of poetry out already, but it's like, yeah, that takes work. And that should be inspiration for you to like get your stuff out. I find it inspiring, so we do need community, but community also takes work, as any of us know, as you guys and I know, as Hmong American writer, you know how much community, how much work goes into community. And so, as someone who's done a lot of that, I try to think about what is it that I need, but then you also need to take care of yourself. I think as an arts administrator, when you spend a lot of energy promoting others and nurturing others, then your own writing maybe suffers too, and so part of being in community is to also show what's possible. So, you've got to work on your own stuff, and you've got to focus on your own creation as well, so that, those that are, younger can also see what's possible. So yes, we need community. Yes, we need to build it. And maybe in this world of, virtual meetings and things like that, we don't have to have face-to-face meetings, but I really miss the face-to-face meetings. I really miss seeing people. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to meet in person one day, someday soon, and see each other and hear each other's voices and read each other's stories.
Thank you, Mai Neng. This next question, I believe, comes from Renee. Yeah. What have you been doing to keep yourself, for all of you, what have you been doing to keep yourself occupied during the pandemic?
If I answer this honestly, it's like, I don't know if it discredits me as a poet or as a person, but I've been playing so much Animal Crossing. Yeah, that's been my life-saving game. Among other things, I regrettably, I've not been able to go out hiking and walking like I usually do. In the beginning of the pandemic, the parks were swarmed because, people thought, oh, if we can't go to the store, let's all go to the park. And that was kind of chaotic. So I just stayed away from the local parks that I used to go away and find. The local parks were kind of like a haven for me, where I could just kind of be by myself on the trail. But I've not been able to do that at all for over a year now. I've been in quarantine for over a year. I've not seen any friends or family for over a year. I'm a little stir crazy, but Animal Crossing New Horizons has been it's been really amazing. But that's me.
For me, don't know if it's wrong to say this, but being quarantined, I feel like it has been a blessing for me because I have so much time to just do things that I wouldn't, have the time to do. I've been sculpting and building model kits a lot. Something that I wanted to, put more time into, and I got to do a lot of that. I also got to write more outside of screenwriting, because for me, screenwriting is sort of like work, but that I could write. I've been going back to work on fiction. So that's great. And then I was able to binge watch all of Game of Thrones because I never jumped on that, So I watched all of it within a week. And then I also got into playing Mortal Kombat again. So, and this is not because of the movie, but I was actually playing a lot prior to the movie. So, yeah, I actually don't want to go back. Like if I could, I just want to stay like this because I find myself being more productive. But maybe that's sort of like selfish. So, yeah.
So I have a regular 9-to-5 job because, as my husband said, bills got to be paid. So that's been keeping me busy, to get up every day, to go to work and things like that. My kids have been doing distance learning at home. And so, I'm always the lunch lady every day. Sometimes I'm IT support, always the Phi Ed teacher because I'm like, okay, let's go out for a walk or do something. And then I've been reading a lot. When I don't write, and I don't write every day. I mean, after a whole day of work and, dealing with my kids, I'm tired. I want to veg and watch a movie. Yes, I watched Game of Thrones too. It was really good. But in Burlee, you can do your own Hmong Game of Thrones because damn, we got some stories, right? But I've been reading a lot because that's been a way for me to maybe escape and as a savior to me not writing. There's been a lot of stuff going on during the pandemic. I mean, shit has happened. And especially here in Minnesota, it keeps happening. And it's heavy stuff. It's big stuff that you have to deal with, and that make you cry, and sometimes it makes you not be able to write. Like, seriously, guys, I sit in front of the computer and it's a blank screen, because I'm exhausted and I'm tired, but I think it's okay. You don't have to write every day. I think you have to know your own cycle. And I tend to work in cycles where I'm really, really productive. And then there's a lull. And it's almost like I go into hibernation, and I'm not writing, but I'm reading and I'm thinking about things in my head because I know that there's going to be an upswing again and I'm going to be writing soon. So I don't worry about it too much. But guys, surviving the pandemic, it's been work and it's been hard work. And I think however productive you are, it's okay.
Thank you all. This next question comes from Ying Tao, and they asked, what do you want to see in the next generation of writers?
Okay, so I've been thinking about this actually for myself too. I feel like there's the wave of writers from Mai Neng to me and Khaty. I feel like being Hmong and having this burden, of having to tell the our stories, the stories of our elders. I think that I'm hoping that with a newer generation of writers, that maybe they won't feel that burden. I want to read stories about Hmong characters going to space and fighting a spawn of aliens on Mars. I want to read stories that have nothing to do with being Hmong. I want to read. I want to have that privilege, or the writers that are upcoming, to have the privilege to tell whatever stories they want. And I think that has something, for me as a writer, I've struggled with that because of the burdens that I feel like the upcoming Hmong writers sort of have to just, they're obligated to carry, whether it's subconscious or conscious. But I'm hoping that, like, if my kids become writers in the future, that they could tell whatever stories they want, and I think that's sort of a privilege, that people who are not people of color have that privilege. And so I want that privilege, to be able to say whatever I want, to tell whatever stories I want. Yeah.
I would love to see Hmong romance novels. We don't have any romance novels yet, or horror stories. Just when I think about when my kids were right, that sometimes in the classroom, I'm like, so are there any Hmong kids? Like, did you bow? You're like, I'm like, oh my God. So Burlee, you may have your wish, because they're not even sure who the Hmong kids are. Well, they look Asian. I'm like, oh my God, there's only 18 last names. How can you not know who the Hmong kids are? But that's them, right? So we need more LGBTQ stories, LGBTQI stories. We need more stories about what it means to be Hmong American kids. I should ask my kids if they even what they call themselves. Do they even call themselves Hmong, or do they just call themselves Americans? Burlee, you speak about this burden that we have, and I don't know what else to call it, because I feel like I can't escape it. It's like, again, I feel like, my God, if I just like wrote all that shit, then maybe I can write like fantasy stories. I can make up stuff now, but there's like real stories, fascinating stories for people that need to be told. And again, I go back to this, shamans are called, well, writers are called them too, and that's why we have these stories in our heads, and I keep thinking, if I just write it down, then maybe I can move on to writing fantasy. I grew up reading sci-fi and fantasy, and it's amazing to me that I don't write sci-fi and fantasy because I'm like, that's what I read when I grew. That's how I fell in love with like writing, because I'm like, holy cow, writers can create these worlds and these characters that I care about, and stay up late, with my little light under the blankets to read and finish, So I don't know. Hopefully, maybe one day. But how do our kids write stories when they don't see themselves in any of the books that they read about? When they are not characters in any of the books that they read about, like they're not important enough to be the main character in a movie or the main character in a book.
I just wanted to say really quickly, as I know we're kind of coming up on time, that the obligation to keep telling that story, the story of the burdens. For me, I know personally that because my mother was and is kind of like my last memory of that lineage. So don't mistake, my father is still living and my stepmother is still living as well. But the connection that I had with my mom was severed very painfully and abruptly. And so that's why I was emotional when I heard Mai Der say that Hmong bit in the beginning, because Hmong to me, the language is the language of my parents. And it's so dear to me. So when I hear it, I get kind of choked up, because I forgot that was, those were the first sounds that I embedded into my body and into my mind. So when I write, I I feel like I have no choice but to kind of channel what my mom left behind, and also to kind of think about, you know, like what we expect to see from future generations. Just courage to write and to explore. But I do feel like the generation that I am in as well, I'm walking that fine line of that courage, but also the obligation to still tell the story of my parents, because it's just it just was the culture in a Hmong family. You were proud to be the children of Hmong refugees, but then there's the burden of having to tell that over and over and over again, because it's become such a part of your identity. But yes, so what to look forward to in future and current Hmong writers now, just courage and to believe that your voice does matter.
Thank you, Kathy, and my name, Burlee, and I think that's actually a good spot for us to kind of end with a Q&A here. I'm sorry to anyone if we didn't get to your questions, but typically our speakers here also usually, if you email them, they're usually really happy to just respond back to you. So if you have a very urgent question that you want to reach out to them, you know, we encourage you to reach out, email them one-on-one about it. But yeah, apologies again that we didn't get to all the questions. But thank you so much, Mai Neng, Kathy, and Burlee. If we could all give them another round of applause. Thank you so much for the Q&A, for being here with us. Thank you so much. And then I also want to thank the audience. Thank you for coming for tonight's event. We are so tremendously grateful for this time and space together, especially in light of so much heartache right now in our community and everything. We're really grateful and really happy to have this moment. And tomorrow is the first day of May, which is National Asian American and Pacific Heritage Month, actually. And so that's why my officers and I specifically chose to end the Storyteller series on this night, because it was a way for us to celebrate. And so in the month of May, you know, I hope that y'all will find some way to celebrate and support Asian Pacific Americans. And if you would like to keep up with what HAIS is doing, you know, follow us on our social media and check us out on our website. And our second issue for our HAIS journal will actually be coming out soon. So so feel free to stay updated with us and check our website. And again, thank you so much to Kathy, Burlee, and Mai Neng. Thank you so much for your time and your space and your labor. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. We're going to end it here tonight. Have a wonderful night.